Welcome back. Like so many things since the start of the second Trump administration, Juneteenth landed on a different note this year. But that didn't stop crowds from gathering and celebrating in cities across America. Because what you're not going to do is stop this party from partying. Juneteenth marks the day Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, to inform the last enslaved people that they were now free. More than 2 years after Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, has been celebrated in black communities for years. But in 2021, then President Joe Biden made it official, declaring Juneteenth a federal holiday. And Biden marked the occasion this year in Galveston on Thursday, while the current president marked the occasion with a Truth Social post criticizing Juneteenth as a, quote, non-working holiday, which tracks with Trump's posture since his return to office. He's been on a crusade to purge the federal government of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It's kind of his jam. This includes sanitizing or even altogether erasing references to black history and black culture. On his very first day in office, Trump signed an executive order that caused many federal agencies to cancel Black History Month celebrations altogether. He actually signed several executive orders targeting DEI, from attempting to restrict fundings to schools with DEI programs, to targeting museums with Black history exhibits, to vowing to restore Confederate names on Army bases. But Black Americans long fought for Juneteenth to be federally recognized. And even if President Trump doesn't want to acknowledge the day, folks still showed up. They signaled that the fight for equality will continue, just as the struggle for equality will. Joining me now is Dr. Christine Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. She's also author of the book, How to Build a Democracy, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. And Eddie Glaude Jr., who is a distinguished professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. He's also the author of A Native Son on Substack and the book, We Are the Leaders We Have Been Waiting For. Good to have both of you with us. Christina, you wrote in the Amsterdam News, quote, Juneteenth is so important because it is an American holiday, not just a Black American holiday. It is an acknowledgement of the dark past of this nation. And you went on to write, in part, we are in a moment where so many people in power are afraid of the honest telling of this nation's past. Chattel slavery occurred, and banning books and portraits and plaques will never erase what we know. Can you just, for a moment, expound on that?
Well, when President Joe Biden signed in Juneteenth into law, what he said was also that Black American history is American history. We have a collective and shared identity. So to take away this holiday or to ignore it is to also ignore it for all the Americans who are part of this larger democratic project that we're still in the process of working on. No matter how many books you want to ban, no matter how many times you want to say that Tuskegee Airmen didn't exist, or that you want to ignore the Divine Nine or HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, they did exist. They are part of a larger narrative. There's a reason why they existed, because of exclusion, because of the lack of diversity in our larger institutions. And this particular administration, it's not just the president, it's the collective project of his administration, wants to pretend that the sordid history of America didn't happen and we can just move on. All Americans care about is economic futures. But for us to understand how our economic futures are tied or not tied, and generational wealth that does and does not exist, segregation in communities, lack of funding for schools, the list goes on, we have to understand the real history of this nation and the realities that so many Americans have gone through, specifically Black Americans. And we can talk about Native Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans and exclusion in part and parcel of this larger identity project, and even Irish and Jewish and German and Polish and Italian Americans as well. So to ignore the past is to ignore the real narrative of this nation. And I would say the American brochure looks one way and the American reality looks a very different way.
I think this is a very interesting point. Dr. Glaude, I am the only person on this panel without a PhD, so I've got to really up my game here. Christina raises a really good point in that the paradox of America that we're seeing, particularly as it relates to Juneteenth in this moment, is that it wants the credit for the end of such a morally bankrupt institution like chattel slavery, but it doesn't want to pay the cost associated with the memory of what that entails. Can you talk about sort of how American a paradox like that is from a historical context?
First of all, I just want to say, we're not lawyers, so we're just going to defer to you on that one, Doc. And Dr. Greer is so brilliant. I just want to echo and underline everything she just said. I mean, I think it's important for us to understand that, as Secretary Bunch of the Smithsonian has put it to me, America is more than an idea, it's an argument. It's a battle over its meanings, right? And what we see here is that there's a particular understanding of the idea of freedom as the possession of one group to give to another. The possession of one group to give to another who can then take it away. And we have to read Juneteenth, I think, Doc, within the context of a long tradition of emancipation days, because African-American history has been in so many ways a commentary on the contradictory nature of freedom in the country. Emancipation Day, we celebrated January 1st for the end of the transatlantic slave trade, January 1st, 1808. We celebrated the abolition of slavery, July 4th or July 5th in New York, right? We celebrated British West Indian Emancipation Day, or the end of slavery in the British West Indies, August 1st, 1834. Juneteenth is part of this fugitive memory, right? A commentary on the country's failure to live up to its promise. So what we see right now, Coleman, is actually the latest iteration of a country trying to forget its past, trying to disremember, to use Toni Morrison's language. And whether they federally acknowledge it or not, this tradition, this alternative celebratory calendar that's been a part of African-American history will continue on, and we will continue to eat our red velvet cake and barbecue every Juneteenth, as we have done since June 19th, 1865.
And you called me Coleman, which I knew you was in the pulpit then, so I was just going to let you cook. Christina, Eddie raises a really good point, is that regardless of what you're talking about in Magaland, this party is going to go on and going to keep going. But can you talk about, beyond the actual celebration, the significance in this moment of community owning their voice, regardless of whether it's endorsed or approved by this administration?
Right. So part of the larger beauty of being Black in this country is that we have a longstanding legacy and history of celebration, even when we were enslaved in U.S. chattel slavery on this here land, right? So we have a very long history, a strong history of finding joy in some of the darkest days. And I know that, now that we can share these stories on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, we have seen that no matter the geographic locale, somehow we have a shared identity, right? How is it that, my grandmother from Florida is the same as someone else's grandmother from South Carolina, or Eddie's grandmother from Mississippi? They didn't have social media. They weren't on the phone talking, but somehow they said the same phrases, right? We had the same jokes, the same internal jokes. I mean, and so there's something we're still trying to figure it out, I think, as scholars, honestly. Is it DNA? Is it in the spirits? Is it in the food? We are not exactly sure how it is that we have this common shared joy that cannot be defeated. It will not die, no matter how many dark days that this country tries to impose on us. It fails consistently, and we literally rise through the soil, I like to say, like okra, right, because of our shared collective identity in a diasporic sense with our Caribbean brothers and sisters, with our brothers and sisters from the continent. There is something that I think Juneteenth continues to tap into, and I love to see so many Black people from the diaspora also celebrating Black American holidays. I mean, I wrote about this in Black Ethnics, about our collective and our identity and our ability to build coalitions, because there's something about this country that Toni Morrison and James Baldwin have written about so eloquently, and dare I say Eddie Glaude as well, that tries to destroy a Black spirit, and it has not. And I think what it keeps showing is that it cannot. And so this holiday is just one of the many that we will continue to celebrate, whether it's federally recognized or not. And it's something that we will continue to educate our children about, whether it's in their schools or not. Black families have always had to educate their children outside of academic institutions to make sure that we know our real history, since people like Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan aren't taught as regularly in school as well.
I think one of the most important points you just made was the distinct place within the diaspora that a Black American holiday and a Black American celebration and a foundationally Black American idea has and should have in terms of celebration, observance, and discussion. And I think that that's not something that we always talk about, and the importance of other aspects and other elements of the diaspora to be specifically in support of that. Critically important. Eddie, you exist, as does Dr. Greer, in the space of academia. What do you say when you may be challenged as to not the historical significance of Juneteenth, but the present day need for its celebration, as if it should or could be optional? Why would it be something that must continue to be observed?
Well, first of all, let me just say Charles Coleman, Esquire, right? So it's not just Coleman, right? I got you, Doc, right? So let's be clear here. I think when I face that challenge, right, the way in which I respond is that there is an insistence on remembering the country's past in order to imagine its future differently and to understand its present more fully. Right. This is me echoing in so many ways, T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton, that play, right, that poem in the four quartets about the relationship between past, present, and future. Right. So what does it mean in this moment for the country to try to turn a blind eye to the past that actually gives us an account of what we're doing? What does it mean, just really quickly, that if we think about the history of the country, Charles, in 1924, right, with the Immigration Act, can we understand immigration policies today in relation to that past? What does it mean at the sesquicentennial of the country in 1926 that Negro History Week was founded as the Klan was trying to celebrate its convocation on the 150th anniversary of the nation? What does it mean in 1976 that Black History Week became Black History Month at the moment in which the nation was trying to reconcile itself to its past and its future? So in this moment, when so many people are trying to forget because we have a white nationalist project in the White House, Juneteenth becomes all the more important. That's how I'd answer if I didn't do this. Just dismiss it altogether.
And this is how, even after Juneteenth, don't get it twisted, we are going to keep the conversation smart, but more importantly, we're going to keep it blackity, black, black, black. Thank you, Dr. Christina Greer and Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. We'll be right back.